all I do is win.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Yeah, it's awesome to have another office hour with you all. We are still in the version control week, and yeah, it's going to still be about version control. So the last class, I was explaining version control and the types of version control, and I didn't finish up. I am going to continue that with today's class. Yeah. So basically, like I said, we have the local version control, we have the centralized version control, and we also have the distributed version control systems. And the local version control system was the one that people used back then. And I showed an example using a zipped file to explain how it works back then. I then also talked about centralized version control systems, that centralized version control system is better than local version control system in the sense that it gives you the opportunity to collaborate with coders, since you can push your code to a centralized server and have others fetch it from that server, right? But the issue with the centralized version control system was the fact that everything was in a centralized server, right? So if the server have a downtime, nobody can really work on a particular project because the file that they're working on is in this centralized server and they don't have access to it, right? So that was the issue with centralized version control system, and they are still existing actually, but many people are no longer using it, right? We now have the distributed version control system, and that is where we have Git and GitHub. The distributed version control system actually works in such a way that everybody working on a particular project have a copy of it on their machine. So it's like a combination of the local version control system and distribution, right? It's distributed in the sense that different people have the same copy of a particular file on their own local machine. So basically, when you start working on different projects and then you want to like fork a repo or you want to clone a repo, that is you having the exact copy of the files in your own machine. And I also explained that version control is not something that is only for developers. It is a general concept that is actually very useful and beneficial. So anyone absolutely working on files can use version control, right? Can use version control, right? So as you can see, GitHub, when it comes to GitHub, you upload files, right? So just the way you upload code files because you're a developer, other people too, other fields can still use GitHub. It is basically a cloud service that just helps you manage changes to what you're working on, right? So version control is not a thing for only developers. It is a general concept that designers can use and writers basically can use, right? But you're a developer, and of course, you're going to be using it as a developer, right? So somebody has the difference between Git and GitHub. Basically, Git is what, you're seeing a Canva design because it is a Canva design I have on my screen, right? I am basically explaining what version control is. So Git and GitHub, right? Git and GitHub. GitHub is not the version control system. Don't actually get it twisted. GitHub is a cloud service that works with Git, right? So since GitHub is a cloud service, it means that GitHub actually, GitHub cannot, since GitHub was built for Git, it means that GitHub cannot really, GitHub, how do I put it? Okay, Git, right? Git is the version control system exactly, and that is what you use on your local machine. What you install is Git, not GitHub. Git is a software, right? While GitHub is a cloud service. So you can basically use Git without GitHub, right? Because Git is the one controlling everything, all your versions, right? Without GitHub, Git can work. But GitHub was actually designed to help working with Git better, right? So Git does not need GitHub, but yeah, you need GitHub needs Git, right? So basically, Git can work with other cloud services too. Like there's GitLab and other cloud services, but GitHub just appears to GitHub is just the most popular one that people use, right? It's not like there's no other. There are others, but GitHub is the most popular one. Just the way we have VS Code and we have Sublime, we have other code editors that exist. These code editors can do the same thing that VS Code can do. It's just that VS Code is very, very popular and people are comfortable with using VS Code. So that's the way we have GitHub too. So GitHub was actually, it's just a cloud service that helps you see what you're using your Git to control, right? It's just to see versions, the versions that you're using your Git version control system to control. So yeah, that's the difference between Git and GitHub. So normally if anyone wants to use Git on their system, they would have to install Git as a software, right? They will have to install Git as a software, and Git, you can normally install Git SCM. That one will just give you different environments like Git Bash and the likes, everything about Git particularly. Yeah. So yes, GitHub has a drag and drop feature where you can drag a file and drop it there. But as a developer, right? As a developer, you use Git, right, to push to GitHub. It's not like you can still drag your developer file to GitHub, right? But as a developer, you use your terminal because that's what developers do. You have to get acquainted with your terminal. So we use your terminal to just do the Git command, the push to GitHub and stuff like that. So basically, version control is what different people uses it, right? I am not a designer myself, so I'm not able to give details about how designers use it. But for developers, right? For developers, you use the terminal most times to push your code from the local machine to the cloud service. So I'm just going to open GitHub. This is a summary kind of class. So I'm just going to open GitHub, right? So when it comes to Replit, let me just explain this Replit class first of all. So as you can see, you cannot push your code from VS Code to GitHub without using Git because you're push, Git push, Git push. It is a Git command. So you cannot use a Git command without initializing Git in your folder. And how do you initialize Git? What makes it possible for you to initialize Git is the fact that you have Git installed in your local machine. If you don't have Git installed in your local machine and you do something like Git push, you're going to get an error that obviously informs you that you do not have Git, right? Your VS Code is not understanding what you mean by Git push or even Git init. So you have to have the software in your local machine to be able to use the commands, right? So when you have the software, you initialize Git in your folder, then you can now use the command like Git push and the rest. So as you can see, we used to use online IDEs, right? We used to use online IDE. Somebody asked, what's the difference between online IDE and normal version control? That's because I was like, you use the centralized server, right? For centralized version control, you're able to collaborate with others. And somebody was like, since we have code editors, online code editors, and we can just simply copy the link to our work and send to others, that's what is the point of version control. Online editors are not version control systems, right? Online editors are not version control system. It is really true that you can share your code easily using online editors, right? But it is not a version control system because it does not even give you the opportunity to, it does not give two people the opportunity to work on the same folder, right? What version control does when it comes to collaboration is the fact that version control allows different people from different parts of the world, anywhere you are, it's a global system. It allows different people to work on a particular file. So when you are in a company or you work somewhere, you can have 5 different people working on a particular file. So this one works on, let's say one person is working on the about page and another person is working on the back end of the application, or just basically sharing different portion of the whole work, right? What enables version control actually gives the opportunity, like, okay, let me put it this way, cloud services, right? With cloud services like GitHub, different people can actually work on a particular file. But on online IDEs, you only just send them your work to see, right? You are not collaborating when it comes to online IDEs. And I cannot collaborate because it doesn't just work. Basically, you don't collaborate with online IDEs. You just use it to quickly show people what you've worked on, but it does not allow people to collaborate, and it does not control versions of your code. There's nothing like version control in online IDEs. As you can see here in Replit, you can see this symbol here that looks like a plug. It says version control. So if online IDEs are version control systems themselves, then probably it will not have this feature here that says version control. And if I click on this version control now, you see that I can actually, you can see I connected my Replit to my GitHub. You can connect your Replit to your GitHub, right? You can connect your Replit to your GitHub. I connected my Replit to my GitHub, and as you can see, I can create a new repo. I can push these things I have here to an existing repo, right? And it also have a shell, just the way VS Code has a shell where you can, write its commands or whatever thing you want to run on the shell. But yes, in as much as you can push from Replit to GitHub, I'm not going to be showing you that because I encourage the use of VS Code, right? You guys should get used to using VS Code and the terminal that is in VS Code. So for your assignments, you can open your folder in VS Code, or you can copy it. If you have it in Replit, copy it, put it in VS Code, and then push from VS Code, right? So that is it for online IDEs. So GitHub has so many features. Like when you get to project phase now, right? When you get to project phase, you have to work with different people on a particular project. You have to work with different people on a particular project, and GitHub actually makes collaboration easy. In project phase, let's say you have a team lead, right? The team lead now, the way it works, the team lead will create a repo. To create a repo, just for you to click on this, right? Mr. Isaka already touched so many of these, right? I'm just giving, summarizing things. So if you can click on this plus sign, right, to add a new repo. You can see new repositories. You can create a new repo there. And when you create a new repo, the way it will work for the project phase, the lead of the project, right? The lead of the project will create a repository about the project that you guys are working on, right? Once the lead of the project creates that repository, it's now going to go to settings. When it goes to settings, right, you can see here that this place says collaborators. So when you click here, it will ask you for your password, right? So the way the lead will work, the lead will now add group members to this part, right? Add people. The lead will add group members by email to the repository so that these group members can now work on the repository, because when it comes to project phase, it is group work. Everyone has to contribute. You cannot be in the group and not contribute. So the group lead will add everyone as collaborators, right? And then the lead can now go further to make things easier by using this feature here that says issues, right? GitHub issues. So GitHub issues is just a way to assign tasks to different people that are working together on a particular repository. Like when it comes to open source, for example, now, open source simply means that, okay, let me put it this way, just the way we have applications. There are some applications that you use. They will say it is open source and free. First of all, don't get it confused. Don't get it twisted. Open source is not the same thing as free. Some projects can be open source and not free, while some projects can be open source and free. Open source and free simply means that the codes behind a particular application or a particular project is open to the public to work on or to make recommendations, right? So for example, VS Code is open source. So as you're using VS Code now, you're using VS Code, you use it so much that you understand VS Code so much, and then there's something about VS Code you want them to change, or you have been using VS Code and then you notice that, oh, there's this slight error with VS Code. Since it is open source, what you can now do is you can look for VS Code, the VS Code repository on GitHub, right? When you look for that, you can now propose that, oh, you want to work on this, and then you attach proof that, oh, this is the error that VS Code has, and you want to work on that error. The way you do it by creating an issue, right? So you can create an issue. As you can see, you click on this issue, you can create an issue, you just put new issue, and then once this opens up, you just give it a title, blah, blah, blah. You give it a title and then you write, oh, I want to work on this. This is the error this is the error I saw and stuff like that. And then you can see that it says attach files by dragging and dropping or selecting or pasting them, right? So you can now attach a screenshot of the error you have noticed in VS Code. Or if you don't have a screenshot, if it's not an error, you can just write convincingly about what you recommend, right? What you recommend that should be added for this VS Code or any other open source project you want to work on. So you can use issues, and then when you create that issue, the people that are when you create that issues, the people managing the repository for VS Code will now consider the issue and approve it or not, right? So they can now approve and say, oh, okay, go ahead. They'll now give you access to, edit, and they'll now, if you actually work on the project and you push your code, because they have approved your issue, they are now going to merge it into the main repository. And at that point in time, you can now proudly say it anyway that, oh, I contributed to this open source project and stuff like that. So without version control in the first place, there won't even be open source projects because people will not be able to collaborate, right? So basically these issues You can use it to, make propose that you want to work on something, or you can actually use it in project phase. So as a team lead, you can come here and say, oh, okay, the name of your project is CAC app, right? So let's say the name of your project is CAC app. So sorry about that. So let's say the name of your project is CAC app. So you can now say something like, if you have added collaborators, right? As you can see, when I typed at, I am seeing only I am Victoria, which is myself, because I don't have any collaborators in this repository. I don't have any collaborators in this repository, right? So I can now, I cannot tag anybody, but if I've added collaborators and I put hats, right, I'll be able to tag people that I'm collaborating with and say things like, oh, at this, please work on so, and so. When the person is going to receive an email, right? The person is going to receive an email, and then the collaborator can now work on that particular assigned issue. Once the collaborator works on it, it can now submit it. It will, on the person's end, it will show that, oh, person can actually reply to this issue I'm creating. So the person will respond to the issue. Oh, okay, I am on it. After doing it, I have done so and so. So after doing that, the person will be able to close the issue on his or her hand. Or me, I'll be able to close the issue after checking the person's work. And if I'm not satisfied with the person's work, what I will now do is I will now reopen the issue if the person has closed the issue. So I will now reopen the issue and say, oh, please edit this, right? So GitHub issues is actually one way that you can work with each other in the project phase, right? And then when it comes to repositories too, as you can see here, I named this repository friend. It doesn't mean anything. The repository is basically not useful. So let's say I create a repository, and let's say for some reasons, I don't want that repository on my GitHub profile anymore. I can just simply click on settings, right? I can click on settings, and if I click on settings, under danger zone, I can choose to delete my repository, right? I can choose to archive this repository. I can choose to change visibility, because, when you're creating repositories, it always tells you public or private, because you can have private repositories. Private repositories, when people go to your GitHub account, they won't see it. They won't see that you have that repository. It is private. So it will only be visible to people that you added as collaborators. Like when it comes to, okay, let's say projects that are not open source, right? Or projects that do not want people to see their source code. They'll make their repository private so that people will not see their source code. Or let's say you as a person, you're working on a particular project and you don't want anybody to see what you're working on. You can just make your repository private. Only you will see it. So let's say you make a repository public, and for some reasons you don't want it to be public anymore. You can just change the visibility here, right? You can transfer ownership of repository. You can archive a repository. That is, you're not deleting it here. Basically, just archiving it. It will not be showing among your repositories. But this one, you can delete the repository, right? And if you want to delete your repository, you just have to type this, and I understand the consequences, and it is gone for good. So README files are just files about your project, right? They're just files about your project. So yeah, I'm just going to go back. So as you can see, this repository, I created it. If you want to create a repository, right, and you want it to be that you have all this Git command at your disposal, do not create it with a README file. once you create a repository with a README file, all these things, you won't see it. So let's say you're somebody that is still new to GitHub and you don't know the commands, right? You have to start cracking your brain. Oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do this? But creating a repository without a README file gives you all the commands that you need to successfully push your code to GitHub. So this repository I created is without a README file. And as you can see here, it's telling me, oh, to successfully push to this repository, right? I can just do git init on my folder in VS Code, do git admin. So let's say, for example, this VS Code file. Yeah. Let's say this now. Okay, let me just open a new. Let me open a new folder. So right here, I have this. So let's say this hello now. I now have an index.html. So let's say HTML5, and then inside body, I just have an h1 tag, my test report. So this is something I've done, right? Now, because I have created a repository without a README file, I can just follow what is in the repository easily, right? And just make my life easier. So I can just can open my terminal and I can do git init, right? I can initialize git. So as you can see, this is the first command here, git init. So you can ignore this readme.md, git init, right? You have to initialize git. And then after initializing git, you can see that here that it says git add readme.md. This is you only put this git add readme.md if you want to only add a readme file to your repository. But you don't just have a readme file. You don't even have it. I don't even have a readme file right now. What I have here is an index.html file. I can now create a readme file here. Readme. I can create a readme file here, right? And I can now type, oh, this is my first repo. This is the readme just simply means describe what you are pushing, like describe what your project is about. What is the repository about? So let's say you're working in project phase and the name of your project is calc app. In your GitHub, in your readme file, you can now tell anyone about calc app. So calc app is an application that helps people calculate this and that. This and that this is just basically description of your repository. It is different from commit description. README just tells you about the repository in total, right? What you're doing in that repository. While Git commits with a message, basically the message talks about the changes you are making, right? The changes you are making. So, but the README should be basically about, oh, what the repository is about or what you're working on. So when it comes to README files, there can be two README files in the GitHub. The first README file, the normal README file is this one about the repository. But the second README file is something that you create only once in a lifetime, not once in a lifetime, basically, once in every GitHub account, right? That is a special README file, and that is the readme that was in your assignment, which is the username.md. The username.md, it is not basically username like username. It is basically your username, right? So let me leave this place now. If I come to this place, if I come to new repository now, that template that was shared for you to create your username.md file, that readme file, it's just a template to make things easier for you. It's just a template to make things easier for you. Basically, you can just come here and do, my username is I am Victoria. That is just what they're asking you to do with the readme.md. So if it's not working for you, just come here and do I am Victoria, right? And as you can see, it says the repository I am Victoria already exists on this account. This is because this is a repository that can only exist once in every GitHub account. So when I create this I am Victoria as a repository, it is a special repository that allows me to tell GitHub users about myself. And I've already created this before, so I can't create it again. It is because I created it that I'm able to, it is because I created that special repository that I'm able to do all these designs and this write-up about myself, right? So that's what the special repository does. And as you can see, it says I am Victoria/readme.md. So that is what it was saying that's what it meant when it said username.md. But everything has been explained, especially in Monday class. We took our time to explain the assignment, how to do Git branch and everything issues with, we are still having issues with Git branch and understanding how to create the special repo. And please do it to watch Monday class. So if I go, so if I go back to this repository called friend. So I already did my Git in it. I can now do, so I can copy this, basically just git add readme.md. So like I was saying, I have this as my readme, but I don't just have a readme file. I have an index.html file too, and I will have to add everything at once. So instead of me to do the git add readme file, I'll do a git add. So git add then dot actually adds every single thing you have here to the repo. So after doing that, I can check the status of what I've done. So I can do git status. So if I do git status, as you can see, it says changes to be committed, because when it comes to Git version control, the first thing you do is to add your files. The second thing you do is to commit your file with a commit message. Then the third thing you do is to push it right to your repository. So as you can see, it says changes to be committed. So if you come here, you can now see that the next thing says git commit -m, then it has first commit in between it. You can just copy and paste that and then change the first commit to whatever you want to change it to. You can leave it as first commit, or you can change it to something like basic project structure, or basically just what you did here, right? So you can just put in a message -m message, and I'm just going to click enter. And as you can see, it says 2 files change, setting insertion, create notes, stuff like that, just telling me that, oh, I have committed this. So if I do git status, as you can see, nothing to commit because I have committed. And then the next thing I have to do is to git push. So you see that I am not really cracking my brain so much. I'm just copying and pasting what I have in the repo here, right? Because I created this repo without a Git, a readme file. So I can just paste that here. So this just make sure that I am in the main branch, right? Because yes, just make sure that I'm in the main branch, and then I can now do git remote add origin. This link here is just the link of this repository, right? So when I'm saying git remote add origin, I'm just like saying, oh, I want to add this repository so that when I push, it enters this repository. So when you see people collaborating on projects, or when you see people cloning a project, what they are cloning the repository with this link. That is why I'll show you that later. But yeah, you just copy that and you can paste this in here. And when you click enter, it has added that remote origin. And then you can just copy the last one that says git push -u origin main. And when you start, you may be copying and pasting, but with time, you just get used to it normally and you just know, oh, this is the next thing to do. This is what I'm supposed to type, right? So if I git push now, it will push these two things to the repository. So as you can see here, I've git push. I put git status now to say your branch is up to date with origin/main. That is, I have pushed to, how do I create other branches? Please check Monday class. So I have pushed to the repository. So I can now, if I refresh this repository now, because there's something there, this how to create this, how to do this will go away. To go away. And as far as I've already initialized Git in my repository, if I come here, even if I open this folder 2 years later, I've already initialized Git in this repository, and this folder is existing on GitHub. So even if I come to this folder, if I open this folder 2 years later, I do not need to initialize Git again. I can just continue and do Git push or Git whatever I want to do, right? And as you can see, I now have this here, and you see the readme displays as this. Once anybody opens a repository, the first thing they see is the readme. The way the readme works is it just opens up all the text in the readme file. So if I have something very long, it will extend downward with all the write-up showing clearly. Right, all the write-up showing clearly. So like I was saying, if you click on this code now, you see here that it says if you want to clone this repo now, you're copying this. If you copy this now, what you're copying is that link that you did git add remote. Just this I am Victoria/friend is just basically a link to this repository. So yeah. So that is it for today's class. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you so much for attending today's office hour. Yes, I'll end the call right now.